The alarm clock reads 7:47 a.m. on a Sunday morning in Hartwell, Georgia. Population 4,469. Sarah Martinez pulls into the empty parking lot of what was once the busiest place in town every Sunday for over a century. The Methodist church that her great-grandmother helped build in 1923 now sits silent, its white steeple casting a long shadow over cracked asphalt where families once gathered in their finest clothes, children clutching colorful bulletins, and the aroma of Mrs. Henderson's famous coffee cake wafted from the fellowship hall. But Sarah isn't here to attend service. She's here to lock the doors forever. Across America, this scene repeats itself with startling frequency. Every week, an average of 3 churches close their doors permanently, and nowhere is this phenomenon more pronounced than in the small towns that once formed the backbone of American society. The Sunday morning ritual that defined generations, the ringing bells, the pressed shirts and polished shoes, the handshakes and hugs after service, is vanishing so quietly that many don't notice until it's gone. In 1955, nearly 85% of Americans identified as Christian, and church attendance peaked at an all-time high. Small-town main streets fell silent every Sunday morning as entire communities migrated to their places of worship. The phenomenon was so universal that businesses planned around it. Movie theaters delayed their matinee showings, and even gas stations knew to close until afternoon. Today, that number has plummeted to just 47% who actively attend religious services, with rural areas experiencing the steepest decline. But this isn't just a story about religion. It's about the unraveling of the social fabric that held small-town America together for generations. The signs were there long before anyone paid attention. In Millfield, Ohio, population 1,847, the First Baptist Church that once hosted 300 worshipers every Sunday morning now struggles to fill 2 pews. Pastor Jim Thornton has watched his congregation dwindle from 180 members in 1998 to just 23 today. The average age? 72. I remember when we had to set up folding chairs in the back because we couldn't fit everyone, Pastor Thornton recalls, his voice echoing in the cavernous sanctuary. The children's Sunday school rooms were bursting. Now we haven't had a child in Sunday school in 8 months. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The death of Sunday mornings in small-town America didn't begin with millennials abandoning faith or the rise of the nones, those who claim no religious affiliation. It began much earlier with a seemingly unrelated phenomenon that would reshape American society forever: the interstate highway system. When President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act in 1956, authorizing the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate highways, few could have predicted its impact on Sunday morning traditions. The interstates didn't just change how Americans traveled, they changed where Americans lived, worked, and worshiped. Suddenly, the geographic constraints that had bound communities together for generations began to dissolve. Young families could live in small towns but work in distant cities. They could drive 30 minutes to a larger church with better programs, newer facilities, and more families their age. The local church, which had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless personal tragedies, couldn't compete with convenience and choice. Welcome to Professor Archive, where we uncover the hidden stories that shaped our world. I'm your host, and today we're exploring how America lost its Sunday mornings. Not through dramatic collapse, but through 1,000 small decisions that nobody saw coming. By the way, I'm curious, where are you watching this from, and what time is it where you are right now? Are you perhaps someone who remembers those traditional Sunday mornings, or maybe you're discovering this history for the first time? Drop a comment and let me know. I read every single one. The transformation didn't happen overnight. In the 1960s and 70s, small-town churches began to notice subtle changes. The Johnson family started driving to the newer Presbyterian church in the county seat. The Williams clan joined a non-denominational church with contemporary music and a youth pastor. One by one, families began what sociologists call church shopping, a concept that would have been incomprehensible to previous generations. Dr. Robert Putnam, Harvard sociologist and author of Bowling Alone, documented this phenomenon extensively. His research revealed that between 1975 and 2000, religious participation declined by roughly 40%, but the decline was most severe in communities with populations under 10,000. The data told a story of gradual abandonment, not dramatic rebellion. It wasn't that people stopped believing, Dr. Putnam noted. They simply started believing they could find God somewhere else, somewhere more convenient, somewhere that better matched their lifestyle. The ripple effects extended far beyond empty pews. In small towns, churches weren't just places of worship. They were community centers, social hubs, and safety nets. The Methodist Church in Millfield ran the only soup kitchen in 3 counties. The Baptist Church organized the annual Fall Festival that brought the entire community together. The Lutheran Church hosted AA meetings, grief support groups, and served as the unofficial town hall for civic discussions. When these institutions began to falter, the entire social infrastructure of small-town life began to crack. Consider the case of Bryson City, North Carolina, nestled in the Great Smoky Mountains. In 1980, this town of 1,411 residents supported 7 active churches. The Sunday morning bells created a symphony that echoed off the mountain ridges, calling families from their breakfast tables to gather in fellowship. Children walked to church carrying their offerings in small envelopes. Teenagers reluctantly traded their Saturday night adventures for Sunday morning suits, and elderly widows found purpose in organizing potluck dinners and visiting the sick. By 2010, 3 of those churches had closed permanently. 2 more merged out of financial necessity. The remaining congregations, once rivals for the best choir or the most successful bake sale, now struggle simply to keep their doors open. But the story of Bryson City reveals something unexpected about human nature and community resilience. When the traditional structures began to fail, something remarkable happened. People began to create new ones. The old Presbyterian church building, with its soaring ceiling and hand-carved pews, was purchased by the town and converted into a community center. The monthly potluck dinners that once happened in church fellowship halls moved to the fire station. The informal network of church ladies who once organized meal trains for new mothers reformed as a secular community support group. Sarah Coleman, who grew up attending First Methodist in Bryson City, found herself organizing these new community efforts. "We realized that what we missed wasn't necessarily the sermons or the hymns," she explained. "What we missed was belonging to something bigger than ourselves, having a reason to get up on Sunday morning and connect with our neighbors." This adaptation represents a broader trend across rural America. As traditional religious observance declines, communities are reimagining what Sunday morning fellowship might look like. Some towns have seen the rise of secular Sunday assemblies. Others host farmers markets that serve as informal community gatherings, and many have turned to high school sports as their new Sunday morning ritual. But these substitutes, while meaningful, can't fully replace what was lost. The church provided something unique, a shared moral framework, a sense of continuity with past generations, and a structure for marking life's most important moments. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. According to the Religious Congregations and Membership Study, rural counties experienced a 17% decline in religious adherence between 2000 and 2010, compared to just 8% in urban areas. The Hartford Institute for Religion Research estimates that between 2010 and 2020, approximately 4,000 Protestant churches closed permanently, with the vast majority located in communities with fewer than 25,000 residents. Yet perhaps the most striking statistic comes from an unexpected source. The U.S. Postal Service tracked a phenomenon they called Sunday morning mail volume spike throughout the 1960s and 70s, as families mailed letters and postcards to distant relatives after church. By 2000, this spike had virtually disappeared, replaced by a steady decline in overall mail volume as digital communication took over. Even the mail knew that Sunday mornings had changed. The economic implications ripple through these communities in ways that urban planners never anticipated. Churches were among the largest employers in many small towns, supporting not just pastors and church staff, but also maintenance workers, organists, childcare providers, and countless volunteer coordinators who received small stipends. The loss of these institutions created an economic vacuum that few other organizations could fill. Moreover, churches were often the most significant property owners in town centers, paying property taxes that supported local services. When churches close, these buildings often remain empty for years, creating both financial strain on municipal budgets and visual reminders of community decline. The story becomes even more poignant when we examine what happened to the children who grew up during this transition. Sociologist Dr. Lisa Pierce of the University of North Carolina studied what she calls the last Sunday school generation. Young people who experienced the decline of traditional religious participation during their formative years. What we found was fascinating, Dr. Pierce explains. These children didn't necessarily lose faith, but they lost the social structures that traditionally supported and transmitted that faith. Many of them describe feeling spiritually homeless as adults, wanting the sense of community they remember from childhood but unable to find it in contemporary religious institutions. This spiritual homelessness has contributed to what researchers call the Great American Sorting. Young people who grew up in small towns with declining religious institutions are more likely to move to larger cities, seeking the community connections they couldn't find at home. This migration accelerates the decline of small-town churches, creating a feedback loop that's proven difficult to break. But buried within this story of decline lies an unexpected plot twist. Some small-town churches are not just surviving, they're thriving in ways that would astonish their predecessors. Take the example of New Life Community Church in Adel, Iowa, population 5,205. When three mainline Protestant churches faced closure in 2008, their congregations made a radical decision. Rather than merge or close, they disbanded entirely and formed something completely new. A church that met in the high school gymnasium, embraced contemporary music, and focused on practical community service rather than traditional liturgy. The result was extraordinary. Within 5 years, New Life Community Church was hosting 400 people every Sunday morning, more than the three original churches combined had seen in decades. The secret wasn't theological innovation or clever marketing. It was the recognition that successful religious institutions must serve their community's actual needs, not their nostalgic memories. Pastor Maria Santos, who leads New Life Community Church, puts it simply: we stopped asking, how do we get people back to church? And started asking, how do we bring the church to where people actually are? This approach has sparked a quiet revolution in small-town religious life. Churches that once competed for members now collaborate on community projects. Traditional denominational barriers have given way to practical cooperation. The result is a more flexible, responsive form of religious community that serves its members' spiritual needs while addressing practical challenges like food insecurity, elder care, and youth development. The success stories, however, remain exceptions rather than the rule. For every New Life Community Church, there are dozens of traditional congregations that couldn't adapt quickly enough to changing demographics and cultural expectations. The human cost of this transformation becomes most visible in the stories of individuals who lived through it. Eleanor Mitchell, 89, has attended the same Methodist church in Marion, Kansas, for 73 years. She was married there in 1954, baptized her 3 children there in the 1960s, and said goodbye to her husband there in 2018. This building holds every important moment of my life, she says, running her hand along the worn wooden pew where her family sat for generations. When I was young, this place was packed every Sunday. Children's voices filled the halls during Sunday school. Now, sometimes I count more empty pews than full ones. But Eleanor's story isn't just about loss, it's about adaptation and resilience. When her church could no longer afford a full-time pastor, Eleanor helped organize a lay ministry program. When the youth group disbanded, she started a weekly coffee hour that draws community members who haven't attended church in years. When the building's maintenance became too expensive, she led the effort to share space with a food pantry and senior services program. The building might be quieter now, she reflects, but it's still serving its purpose, bringing people together and serving those who need help. Eleanor's pragmatic approach reflects a broader truth about the death of Sunday mornings in small-town America. While the traditional forms may be disappearing, the underlying human needs they served, community, belonging, moral guidance, and mutual support remain as strong as ever. The challenge is creating new structures that can meet these needs in ways that resonate with contemporary life. Some communities have found success in secular alternatives, others in radically reimagined religious institutions. But all successful approaches share common characteristics. They're locally controlled, responsive to community needs, and flexible enough to adapt as circumstances change. Perhaps most importantly, they recognize that Sunday morning was never really about Sunday morning. It was about creating regular opportunities for neighbors to connect, for generations to interact, and for communities to reaffirm their shared values and mutual obligations. The question isn't whether Sunday mornings will return to their 1950s form. They won't. The question is what will replace them and whether those replacement institutions will prove as durable and beneficial as what came before. Some communities are experimenting with fascinating alternatives. In Montpelier, Vermont, the weekly farmers market has evolved into something resembling the old Sunday morning ritual. Families arrive in their casual best, children run between the stalls while parents catch up on community news, and local musicians provide a soundtrack that echoes through the town square. The market even includes a community concerns booth where neighbors can discuss local issues and organize volunteer efforts. In Cedar Rapids, Nebraska, the high school football team has become the focal point of Sunday afternoon community gatherings. After games, families move to the school cafeteria for potluck meals that serve the same social function as post-church fellowship hours. The conversations include prayer requests for sick community members, celebration of local achievements, and informal coordination of community projects. These adaptations suggest that Americans haven't lost their desire for community ritual and shared purpose. They've simply outgrown the institutional forms that once served these needs and are experimenting with new approaches that better fit contemporary lifestyles and beliefs. The implications extend far beyond small-town America. Urban communities are watching these experiments with interest as city dwellers increasingly report feelings of isolation despite being surrounded by millions of neighbors. The lessons learned in small towns about creating meaningful community connections may prove valuable in addressing the loneliness epidemic that affects Americans across all demographic categories. However, it's important to acknowledge what may be irretrievably lost in this transition. Traditional religious institutions provided continuity across generations in ways that secular alternatives struggle to match. The hymns sung in small-town churches connected contemporary worshipers to centuries of shared human experience. The rituals and ceremonies marked life's passages with weight and meaning that casual community gatherings often lack. Dr. Robert Bellah, the renowned sociologist who wrote extensively about American civil religion, argued that this loss of transcendent shared experience represents a fundamental shift in American culture. When communities lose their connection to traditions that extend beyond living memory, he wrote, they lose access to wisdom and perspective that can't be replaced by contemporary innovation alone. The data supports Dr. Bellah's concern. Communities that have maintained strong religious institutions show greater resilience during economic downturns, natural disasters, and social challenges. These institutions provide not just immediate support during crises, but also the social capital and organizational experience necessary for effective community response. Yet the story of Sunday mornings in small-town America isn't simply one of decline and loss. It's also a story about the remarkable adaptability of American communities and the persistent human desire for connection and shared purpose. As we've seen throughout this exploration, communities that acknowledge changed circumstances while honoring their core values have found ways to reinvent themselves successfully. The key seems to be understanding that forms can change while functions persist, that innovation and tradition can coexist, and that community strength comes from responding to actual needs rather than defending nostalgic memories. The death of Sunday mornings in small-town America, then, might be better understood as a metamorphosis, painful and disorienting in the moment, but potentially leading to new forms of community life that serve contemporary needs while preserving essential human values. What emerges from this transformation will depend largely on the choices current communities make. Will they invest in creating new institutions that serve traditional community functions? Will they find ways to revitalize existing institutions while adapting them to changed circumstances? Or will they allow the social infrastructure of community life to continue eroding without replacement? The answers to these questions will shape not just the future of small-town America, but the broader trajectory of American social life. The lessons learned in places like Hartwell, Georgia, and Millfield, Ohio, may prove crucial for understanding how all American communities can maintain cohesion and shared purpose in an increasingly fragmented world. The quiet death of Sunday mornings in small-town America represents more than the decline of religious observance. It represents a fundamental shift in how Americans understand community, tradition, and their obligations to one another. Whether this shift ultimately strengthens or weakens American society will depend on what rises to take the place of what was lost. The Sunday morning bells may no longer ring across small-town America with their once familiar regularity, but in the silence they have left behind, we can hear the sound of communities reinventing themselves, seeking new ways to answer humanity's oldest questions. How do we live together? What do we owe each other? And how do we create meaning that extends beyond our individual lives? These are the questions that once brought families out of their homes every Sunday morning, dressed in their finest clothes and carrying their hopes for a better world. They remain the questions that will determine whether American communities can create new forms of shared life, worthy of the traditions they're replacing. The story continues to unfold in thousands of small towns across America, written by ordinary people making daily decisions about how to live together in changing times. Their choices will determine whether the death of Sunday mornings represents an ending or a beginning, a loss or a transformation, a conclusion or simply the opening chapter of a new story about what it means to be a community in 21st century America. As Sarah Martinez finally locks the doors of that Methodist church in Hartwell, Georgia, for the last time, she pauses to read the cornerstone. Founded 1923, in faith, hope, and community. The building may be closing, but the aspirations carved in stone remain as relevant as ever. The question is where and how they'll find their next expression. If this exploration of forgotten American history resonated with you, consider supporting Professor Archive with a super thanks. It helps us continue uncovering the hidden stories that shaped our world. And remember to subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that changed everything, often without anyone noticing at the time. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep remembering that every ending is also a beginning.